Hey guys, today I'm replicating the Holy Grail from the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. When I was a kid, I always loved the Indiana Jones movies. But even as a kid, I looked at that Holy Grail and I thought, I wonder what that's made of. All the other grails they showed there were made out of gold. But the Holy Grail was described as the cup of a carpenter, a humble cup.
It would not be made out of gold.
That's the cup of a carpenter.
I think it was most likely meant to be a ceramic cup that had some gold leaf on it. And some of the gold leaf had come off, which is why the gold is in that splotchy pattern. So I'm gonna hand build the chalice from that movie, but not as though it's a movie prop, because the movie prop was probably made out of plastic or resin or something like that. I'm gonna recreate that chalice as if it was an actual relic. So I'm gonna hand form it out of ceramics. I'm gonna slip it with some red material so it has that bright red that we see on it. And then after it's fired, I'm gonna put some gold leaf on it in places so it looks like it came off. I made this printout of a picture which is supposedly the actual prop from the movie. So I'll use this to reference not just the kind of pattern that the gold and red is in, but also the shape. As I'm building it, I can look at it and reference the shape of the cup and the proportions of the cup to the stem and these kind of things. So the only tools I'm using today, pretty basic tools that they would have had in those times. I've got some clay, wild clay that I collected and processed from here in the Tucson area. I've got a small pookie. I've got a gourd rib and a bowl of water. That's all I'm going to use to get this started. Now eventually I'll use a little slip and a polishing stone and these kind of things, but pretty basic tools as they would have had in the first century in Judea. I'll start by patting out a little pancake of clay. And then this is pressed down into the pookie. Once I trim this off even, I'll be ready to add my first coil. This is a bonding pinch. You can learn about the different pinches in the video linked above. And now I'm just using my gourd rib on the inside with my hand on the outside, and I'm just going to give it the shape, the rounded shape that it needs by pressing it out with the gourd rib. Just about 6 inches. That's right where I want to be. And now the other side of the gourd rib is used to smooth out the outside of the vessel. I'm paying special attention to coil seams and any little divots, filling in the low places and scraping off the high places. Okay, I've got the cup formed. I have a couple of things yet to do. I need to let this sit and firm up a little bit because it's really soft and floppy. When it's firmed up, then I'm going to pop it out of the pookie and I'm going to clean up right at the pookie edge. There'll be a little bit of a lip that I'll have to smooth out. And then I also want it to be firm enough, I'm going to set it upside down on the workbench to build that foot on it. So it needs to be relatively firm before I can do that. So I'll catch up with you in a little bit. So I'm going to turn it upside down and pull the pookie off, and you can see there's a little bit of a lip there. I'm using a rib bone to just gently scrape off the clay that's too much, and then I'm going to take some damp clay and fill in those spots where there's not enough. Once I get it all filled in, I'll use the gourd scraper to just scrape it all smooth and even. Okay, so this is firmed up, and I'm just going to clean up the inside and the rim a little bit, and then I'm going to attach the stem. While we were waiting, I made 2 others. I just wasn't sure about the scale of the thing and felt like this might be a tad on the large side. So I made a couple sizes smaller. So this one's about an inch smaller in diameter. And this one's a little smaller yet, maybe another 3/4 to a half an inch smaller. So I'll have a range of sizes here for me to kind of figure out what I want to do. Now these are going to shrink, of course, because they're clay. This one just seemed like a soup bowl. Let's get to work on this, and we'll get that stem attached. Now I'm getting the bottom of my goblet wet where I'm going to attach the base. I'm just scarifying the bottom where I'm going to attach the coil with an abraded stone blade. You could use anything with an abraded edge, like a steak knife or a hacksaw blade. Now because the base has dried a little bit, we want to make sure we get a really strong bond with this first coil. So I'm bonding it really good with a bonding pinch on both the inside and the outside. Pinching these coils up in such a narrow tube is kind of challenging. I had to learn to pinch with just 2 fingers inside there. Now I'm beginning to add the flared foot. Adding that foot was a lot like adding a flared rim to a jar. Notice how I'm using my fingers at the bottom to kind of hold it in place and using my fingers on top to kind of press it down and flare it out. All right, it's the next morning. I've got 3 of these things here now. They're all done and have the bottoms on them. Something like that. Now they need to dry up significantly today, and then I need to do some smoothing on these, and then I want to slip them. I'm going to slip them with that yellow slip that I have so that they'll fire to a nice bright red, just like you see on the pictures of the Grail in the movie. Then I'll get them fired. So I'm kind of in a rush because we've got some bad weather coming, some rain in a couple of days. So I'd like to get these fired before the rain gets here so that even if the weather's bad, I can go ahead and do the gold leafing and get this finished up. So hopefully I'll get these all dried, smoothed, and slipped before the end of the day. Maybe I can even fire these tomorrow. I'm just doing some stone smoothing. This is not polishing, it's stone smoothing. So when you use a gritty, heavily grogged clay like I do, you get bits of temper, bits of grog sticking up. So going over it with a wet stone at this stage just gives you a nice smooth surface, ready to accept the paint or the slip or whatever you're going to put on it. All right, I've been preparing some slip, and I've got all 3 of these smoothed and ready to go. Here is the larger one, which we're following the construction of more closely, and I'm going to start slipping with this one. Now I'm going to slip everything except the inside of the foot, which doesn't make any difference. And that is because if you look at the pictures of the original chalice, there are spots, especially along the rim and maybe a couple inside where that gold is not attached and that red color is shining through. So I want this to be red most places, or any place where the gold isn't covering. I need to slip the entire outside and inside with this yellow slip. When you're slipping greenware pottery, you're adding a lot of moisture to that clay. And so slipping the inside of bowls or jars especially is dangerous because you're adding that moisture, that clay starts to swell, and it can just push itself apart from the inside. There's a lot of outward pressure from that expanding clay. And so you're better off to slip early. Slip when it's still quite damp. The clay hasn't shrunk so much, so expansion is not so big of a problem. You still want to be careful. You can still overdo it and crack it. That's why I put on one thin coat of slip and then wait a little while before I add another coat. This is some yellow ochre that I get up in northern Arizona. It's clay-like, it's sticky. It will even form a crackled texture in the ground. But in the firing, it will not harden fully. It'll still be a little fugitive. So it's good if you're using something like this to just go over it with a polishing stone before the pot dries. And that just presses those particles, those pigment particles, into the still damp clay underneath and make sure that it's fast after the firing, doesn't come off. All right, so third day on this project. So now it's just a matter of letting them dry out. They're fully formed, they're slipped, they're polished. These are a little bit more homemade feeling than what the original looks like. I think that's appropriate for a chalice from the 1st century AD. I think a little bit of a homemade feel to it, a handmade feel, makes it feel more appropriate to the time period. So I think it's gonna feel more like the Grail should feel if it was truly a carpenter's cup than maybe this prop felt. The last item I want to talk about is size. I don't know, I looked online at a lot of the Grail replicas that are being sold on like Etsy and stuff, and they were about 6 inches in diameter. So this one is about 6 inches in diameter. So I made it 6 inches, or I shot for around 6 inches because that's what most of the replicas were. But you know, once I made it, I thought, gosh, that seems really big, especially when you see it in Indiana Jones's hand or up to Sean Connery's lips. It just looks a lot smaller than that. Now, the measurements for the original are something like 11 centimeters, which I think is like 4.5 inches, something like that. And so closer to this size. So, you know, this, I think, is more the size of most of the replicas you can buy online. This may be closer to the size of the original. And, you know, this is somewhere in between. So we've got a range here. And you should get a, you know, a nice feel for the project to determine, you know, what is best, given that I have a range of sizes. And when I go to fire, it's as easy to fire 3 Grails as it is to fire 1 Grail. So I'm hoping to fire today, if I can get these dry enough. And I don't want to rush the drying process. I want them to dry nice and slow, otherwise they're likely to crack. But they're expecting rain tomorrow. So my kiln is, you know, outdoors. So I would like to get these fired today. So if bad weather comes later on, in the next day or two, I can work on gilding these indoors and that'll be fine. So that's my goal today, is just to get these dried and fired. My little primitive convection kiln is very similar to the way pottery would have been fired in the Middle East thousands of years ago. It allows me to quickly fire projects like this in my backyard. If you'd like to learn more about how I built this kiln, I'll put the link to that video up above and also in the doobly-doo. how am I doing? I got these all fired. They fired nice and hard. They didn't come out quite as red as I'd hoped, and I think that just has to do with the oxidation in that little kiln. Sometimes things come out a little, not quite as bright as I'd like. And it's just a subtlety to that kiln that I don't quite understand yet as far as getting things to oxidize real good. I think they really have that natural earthenware kind of look about them. That's what I'm going for. I want a piece of pottery that feels like a carpenter's cup, right? Feels like a humble person's drinking vessel. By making them hand-built with clay like this, they have that feel. The texture, the look of real clay is part of that. And I'm going to move on to the next step, which is applying the gold leaf. Let me work on putting that gold leaf on the largest one first, since that's the one we've been following the construction of all through the video. And we'll see how it goes, all right? Of course, I didn't get real gold leaf. I got imitation gold because real gold leaf is quite expensive. But hopefully the look is right. I have no experience with gold leaf. So I have to apply the glue, and then I have to wait 15, 20 minutes or so for that glue to dry and become real sticky, and then I can apply the gold leaf to it. So I'll apply the glue, I'll wait, and then we'll come back and apply the gold leaf and see how it works. It's hard to be neat with this stuff. You end up getting glue on your fingers, then the gold leaf is sticking to you instead of the pot. It gets everywhere. Of course, like I said, I'm new to it, so there may be tricks I'm not getting. All right, it's looking good, but I'm not done yet. If you look at the original prop, you'll see that the outside has a weathering, kind of a light gray or whitish wash over it that kind of makes it look old, also unreflective and kind of drab. So I've mixed up this wash, which is just a light gray acrylic paint mixed with water that I'm going to apply all over the outside. So imitation gold leaf, that is gold leaf that's not made with actual gold, will tarnish over time if it's not sealed. So I'm using this fixative to kind of seal that in there so that it doesn't tarnish and stays bright, and also to kind of seal it all down so that any of those loose edges of gold don't get pulled up in handling it. There are a few things I would do different if I did this again, and I will talk about those briefly in case you want to try to do your own Holy Grail. You won't have to make the same mistakes I did. If you look at the picture of the original movie prop, the gold areas are more scuffed up. Mine are more solid gold areas. So maybe before I put any of that acrylic paint on there, I might have maybe used some sandpaper or something to kind of scuff up that gold. The difficulty in scuffing up gold leaf is that it tends to want to make little edges that stick up, and you want it to be pretty smooth on the outside. So I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it. Maybe if you could apply the glue in more of a blotchy manner. So if I had to do it again, I think I'd work harder at maybe making my gold areas a little cruder. As I've said before, the original is a little more perfect, but I don't think that helps it to feel like a relic from the 1st century. So I've improved on that as far as I'm concerned, making it feel more like an actual relic. My reds, as I mentioned before, didn't come out as red as I'd hoped, but actually that was only when they were plain red. Once I added the gold and the other effects on the outside, the red really looks a lot redder now in contrast to those other colors. So I'm fairly happy with the color. I could have gotten it redder, but you know, it also is the color of like terracotta, so That's kind of what you would expect from a ceramic cup from the 1st century, again. So in that way, I think it looks really believable as a Grail. The last thing is, when I put that acrylic wash on it to try to age the outside and to make it more drab, if you look at the movie pictures, the outside of that cup is quite non-reflective. That acrylic wash didn't really adhere to the gold areas very well. It did take some of the edge off the gold, make it a little less shiny, but I would have liked to have toned that gold down a lot more. So I don't know if maybe an oil-based paint would have been more effective at covering the gold. That acrylic paint kept wanting to kind of slide off and not to stick onto the metallic surfaces. So I'm not sure if it was the wrong choice of paint or if it was the way I applied it. I think this was a super fun project. Came out with some really nice relics that I can display with the rest of my stuff. If you're interested in improving your coil pottery skills before you get started on this project, check out this video over here, which will help you get better at your coil pottery before you tackle a project like this. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.